But things are not getting better. An opinion poll for this programme puts Labour 8 points behind the Tories, their worst position in 8 years. Good evening, this is Channel 4 News and Sport. The government's in Brighton for the Labour Party conference, but after the fuel protests, pensioners' discontent and the Dome fiasco, you can forget the triumphalist party rallies of recent years. Human embryos have gone missing from a hospital in Hampshire, raising concerns about the level of controls on fertility clinics. And as protesters gather in Prague to picket a meeting of the World Bank, one campaigner on his way to the Czech Republic stops by to tell us just what it is they want.
Here in Sydney, Stephen Redgrave rose his way into the Olympic history books. Steve Backley gets the silver in the javelin, and we take a look at the lighter side of the Games.
Now, as you may know, there was a small earthquake in Warwickshire earlier today, but Tony Blair is probably more concerned about a different sort of seismic shift in Middle England. After suffering 2 weeks of public anger, the Prime Minister today escaped to the relative tranquility of the Labour Party conference. Arriving in Brighton, he called on the public to see the big picture, but according to a poll for Channel 4 News, he's in his worst position for 8 years. NOP asked 1,000 people which party they'd vote for at the next general election. While only 32% said they'd vote for Labour, 40% said they'd vote Conservative, giving the Tories an 8-point lead, their largest since 1992. Labour's declining popularity is confirmed by a poll in tomorrow's Sunday Express. That shows that less than half, 44%, of those who voted Labour at the last general election will definitely support the party at the next. 29% described the Prime Minister as strong, and just 16% said he had been listening to people. And 79% of our sample said they supported the fuel protests, while only 13% opposed them. And after further allegations about the Eccleston affair, NOP asked our sample which party they trust most to behave with integrity. Only 13% believed Labour could be trusted. Even fewer, just 10%, trusted the Tories, while 20% trusted the Liberal Democrats. The largest proportion, 42%, trusted none of the parties not to get caught up in sleaze. So our political editor, Eleanor Goodman, is in Brighton. Eleanor.
Well, that poll, confirmed by 2 more in tomorrow's papers, will concentrate minds wonderfully here. For it's not just that Labour has lost its overall lead, but that the bricks which underpinned its support appear to be crumbling. Party managers here say that will have the benefit of focusing party members' minds on the task ahead and making voters think critically about the Tories' policies. But it also means that there is a real job to be done at this conference, persuading voters that the Labour government is worth re-electing. Tony Blair wasn't going to repeat John Prescott's mistake last year of being seen to drive where lesser mortals go by public transport, so he left his chauffeur-driven car at Gatwick and travelled the last 15 miles by train. That allowed him to formally open a new station, courtesy of the rail track boss, hardly a hero of the Labour movement, and missed the posters beside the roads backing the petrol demonstrators. But the petrol dispute has transformed the political climate, as evidenced by the Channel 4 poll.
What is important, obviously, is that we listen to people, but we also get back to the fundamental choices, which are about an economy that's the strongest it's been for decades, or going back to boom and bust. It's about essential investment in our public services, or massive cuts in investment in schools and hospitals under the Conservatives. And it's about getting people back into work, because that provides a society where there's opportunity for everyone, not just a few. So I think, when you get back to those fundamental questions, we're in pretty good shape.
Tony Blair has this week to strike a balance between his usual conference persona of the tough leader who won't be knocked off course and being seen to respond to the concerns of ordinary voters. But the poll suggests that merely getting the traffic moving again has not been enough to repair the electoral damage. The Channel 4 News polls suggest voters simply haven't believed the government's arguments against a cut in fuel duty. Only 16% agree that it would take money away from schools and hospitals, but more than 3/4 don't accept there's a trade-off. But illustrating the confused state of public opinion, more people think Gordon Brown should spend on health and education than reducing petrol taxes. And in support for a higher pension, and a majority still back increasing spending over cutting fuel duty or income tax. In all, the polls show Tony Blair can no longer walk on electoral water, important for a party leader whose support among members always depended on his extraordinary popularity among the voters rather than deep-seated affection. But the last Labour leader to face such polls thought Tony Blair would shrug them off.
This slight gap is a spasm due to a particular set of circumstances that always helps with the necessary rationalisation. He's a tough guy. He has resolved upon what he wants to do. He's clear and confident in his own mind, and he'll pull the team together and get on with it.
But some union leaders will use the government's unpopularity to try to get it to soften its line on pensions, where Tony Blair rests defeat this week. Hence an interview tomorrow in which he promises to give pensioners priority. Well, with party members arriving here tonight, I'm joined by Margaret Beckett, Leader of the House. Now, Tony Blair says we've got to concentrate on the big picture, but the big picture is that you're more unpopular than at any point since 1992.
I don't think that's the big picture. The big picture, the whole picture, is what's happening in education and the health service and transport and the police, and what we can do to make things even better in the future. That's what the overall picture is. Yes, of course it's important. I would be the first to accept that. It's important that we've seen this shift in the polls, but carrying on dealing with the things that affect people's daily lives is what this conference will be about.
But arrogant, out of touch, those are the kind of things that you used to say about the Tories. Now they're saying them about you.
Well, the Tories have been saying them about us since about day 2 after we were elected.
Well, the people now believing them.
Well, in the hope that if they repeated it often enough, the mud would stick. But of course, it is important, I think, to take on board and to heed, and of course we will, people's anxieties and concerns. But it's also important both that we continue to address the overall picture and that we encourage others to do the same.
You say you will heed, you will listen. Does that mean that you will consider cutting duty, not just some kind of ameliorative measures for hauliers and farmers? You will consider cutting duty?
Well, Gordon Brown's made it plain from the very beginning that what he wasn't ruling out doing as he did last year and taking some steps to ease the problems that people are facing, but that he couldn't do it on a one-off in a 1 week because of something that happened when you don't know the overall picture. As we get nearer to the pre-budget review, and indeed then to the budget, he'll be able to see a better picture of what's been happening over the year. And a lot of nonsense has been written in the news media about, it's very easy to do all of these things. You have to look at making sure you don't endanger the fundamental things where people want to see change.
But people don't seem to accept that argument. But what the other thing that's interesting from this poll is the clear rejection of an income tax cut. And yet the received wisdom has been that Gordon Brown, come the budget just before the election, will use his windfall to cut the basic rate. Would you agree that in the light of public opinion and what you've been saying about tax and spend, that it would be impossible?
Well, I think that's an interesting result of the poll, but of course the real problem that creates is not for us. It's for the Conservative Party.
But no, it's a real problem for you because you're in government. Would they be wrong to cut the basic rate?
They've pledged themselves to cut income tax, they've pledged themselves to cut every tax practically people can think of, and they've pledged themselves to, in effect, £16 billion of spending cuts.
But you're not answering my question, if I may say. I'm asking you, in the circumstances...
You say it's the received wisdom. What you mean is it's what the media keeps suggesting might happen. I don't believe Gordon Brown has ever made any commitment to the package of changes he'll make in the next budget. He'll look at the overall position, see what can be afforded and where the need is greatest.
Well, very quickly, one last piece of received wisdom. It has been that this is the last party conference and then we'll all be geared to go up in May. Should we now be standing down for a May election?
I have never taken the view that it was necessarily to be assumed that there'd be an election in May. There may and there may not. But if you recall, that story first started to be written after our last Queen's speech on the grounds that it contained a lot of worthwhile measures and therefore there must be an election the following year. It was rubbish then, and it's a story that's gone on.
Well, maybe it's rubbish now, but thank you very much, Margaret Beckett. Now back to you in the studio.
Thanks, Eleanor. Well, the Chancellor, Gordon Brown, was with finance ministers meeting in Prague today, where he got some support in his campaign to persuade OPEC to cut oil prices. The G7 group issued a statement calling on the oil-producing nations to increase production to help cut crude prices. Patients are receiving counselling after a Hampshire hospital trust admitted that several frozen embryos have been lost by 2 fertility clinics. The authorities have launched a full investigation but dismissed fears that women might have been implanted with other people's embryos. Samira Ahmed reports.
The unsettling news of missing embryos at this private clinic and the local hospital trust has exposed how, despite all the safeguards of official procedures, something as emotive as the conception of a child can fall victim to simple clerical error. The authority which sets the rules and is investigating what's happened tried today to allay fears that women may have given birth to someone else's child.
It is possible that they may have been put in a different canister, and this is what the audit process and the checking we're going through at the moment will find out. It is also possible that they were not frozen in the first instance, because not all embryos survive. Some of them are judged not to be sufficiently high quality to freeze.
The HFEA says the Hampshire clinic actually has an exceptionally low success rate anyway, though counsellors say that will be of little comfort to the couples affected.
At the end of the day, I think we have to focus on the suffering that is going on at the minute with these people. And that's why, as a national organisation, Issue have put forward their counsellors to try and assist these people in what will be a very, very difficult few days.
Georgia was a frozen embryo, born after her mother, Amy, went through 6 cycles of IVF treatment. And Amy's horrified at what the Hampshire women are going through.
It's so unnatural that the fact that these embryos are yours and your husband's, and yet they're coming from a doctor. They're not coming directly from your husband into your body. And you think to yourself, well, where have they been? You know, are they contaminated? Are they somebody else's? Which is what you asked me about. And the thought of that is frightening.
In the bottling room of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, artificial reproduction may have been dehumanised, but it was at least ruthlessly efficient. The Hampshire case shows how vulnerable the new fertility technology still is to simple human carelessness.
There was a rude awakening for people across Warwickshire early this morning when an earthquake measuring 4.2 on the Richter scale struck the region. The quake, centred on the village of Budbrook, was felt as far away as Rugby. Seismologists say it was the biggest tremor for a decade. Delegates at the Scottish National Party conference in Inverness have voted by more than 2-1 to make Jim Swinney their new leader. Sarah Smith is there.
John Swinney says he is the first leader of the SNP with a realistic chance of either forming a nationalist government or leading Scotland to independence. But he acknowledges the party still has a long, hard road ahead.
People must trust us to deliver. Trust the things that we say. Trust us that we will always be on their side, standing up for the rights of the people of Scotland, standing up for justice, trusting us to deliver Scottish independence. Let us bring independence alive for the people of Scotland. Let us persuade and persuade and persuade about the case for independence. Let us make our Parliament complete. Come with me and let's win our nation's freedom. Thank you very much.
By winning over 2/3 of the vote, John Swinney has guaranteed the party will follow his vision of how to achieve independence. But first he'll have to deal with those who loudly disagree with his strategy. Will you be able to quell some of the louder fundamentalist voices?
Well, I'm not interested in quelling voices. People can have their say, and they'll have their say within the open democratic debate of the SNP. But once we've had the open and democratic debate, I do expect people to support the party's direction because it's been democratically decided.
For today, at least, everybody is agreeing to agree.
In his speech, his victory speech, John made 2 points. First of all, he said that his leadership will be an inclusive leadership, and I welcome that. Secondly, he put independence back at the top of the priority list, and obviously I welcome that as well.
John Swinney will be a very different kind of leader from Alex Salmond, less of a showman, more like a young headmaster. But his supporters insist, whilst Alex Salmond certainly got the voters' attention, it's John Swinney who can win their trust.
Sarah Smith reporting. Now, time to go to Australia, where Sue Turton has news of further British triumphs, including an historic performance by Steve Redgrave.
5 Olympic Games, 5 gold medals. Stephen Redgrave today became one of the greatest Olympians of all time. He's dominated rowing since the Los Angeles Games in 1984, 16 years on, and he's shown the world today that he's still at the very top of his sport. The blood, sweat and tears were over. The hour had come and the eyes of the world were on Britain's Coxless Fours crew. They powered into an early lead in the 2,000-metre race and held off any challenge until the final 100 metres, when a late surge from the Italians, who beat them at the World Championships 2 months ago, put them under pressure. But it wasn't enough to steal the gold. Princess Anne gave out the medals. The first one went to Redgrave, and then Tim Foster, James Cracknell and Matthew Pinsent, who now has 3 golds to his name. Then President Samaranch turned up with an Olympic gold pin. When he won the gold in Atlanta, Redgrave famously told people to shoot him if he ever went near a boat again. Today, he wouldn't say whether he'd be back in 4 years' time.
To me, I get a lot of enjoyment out of the rowing and the winning. There's no question about that. I love winning Olympic Games, and Olympic Games is something very special for me. But if I do stop, that doesn't mean that my life will end because I won't be competing at another Olympic Games again.
On the other side of the world, the rowing club in Henley was glued to the crews every stroke. As they crossed the line, things went a little crazy. Order was eventually restored before the Union Jack flown at the Atlanta Games, when Redgrave won his 4th gold, was unscrewed off the wall and run up the flagpole in their honour. Attention turned to the stadium tonight, where Steve Backley had high hopes of gold in the javelin after missing out the last 2 Olympic Games. Backley looked to be well on course when he broke the Olympic record with this second round throw of 89.86 metres. But Jan Zalezny, his fiercest rival from the Czech Republic, responded with a massive effort of 90.17 metres to take the gold, leaving Backley with the silver yet again. Over on the track, the world's fastest men and women bolted for the finish line. Britain's Dwayne Chambers and Darren Campbell lined up with the greatest names in sprinting, but when the gun went off, the Americans just couldn't be caught. Maurice Green took the gold in 9.87 seconds. So Bolden came in next, and Obadele Thompson took the bronze. In the women's 100-metre dash, Marion Jones's 5 gold medal campaign took off with a bang. She won by a huge margin, posting a time of 10.75. More than a third of a second faster than her nearest rival, Ekaterini Tanu of Greece, and making it the double for the United States. And we finished this Olympic roundup with a lighter look at the week's events through Australian eyes. Their sense of humour needs little translation. For those who don't take their sport too seriously, the Dream is a must-watch. Comedians Roy and HG's nightly roundup pulls no punches.
Australians love Americans. We always have done. And there are a couple of our favourite Americans we can have a look at now and look at why we like them. Let's have a look. Here's Morris Green. You know, I love that jaunty, cocky, cock of the walk. You know, here he is, a really quick bloke. And he's letting us know, you know, how much he likes himself. And here's Tommy Dolan, I think. He's a little bit pumped up, and we love them when they're pumped.
And it's as well Marie-José Pérec didn't see this.
Now, Roy, speaking of chickens...
Yeah.
I don't know whether I can produce the cover of the paper that'll be handy to make this segue. Here it is. Here it is. Yes. Mademoiselle La Chicken. The bird has flown, Roy. The bird has flown.
She's squawked.
And the cartoonists have had a laugh at Perec's expense. That's all today's news from the Olympics. Denise Lewis's campaign for gold in the heptathlon concludes tomorrow. She's currently in 3rd place, struggling with an Achilles injury, but says she's still confident of her chances of victory. Back to you, Alex.
Thanks, Sue. And back on this side of the globe, football. And a good start for the new Chelsea boss, Claudio Ranieri. In his first game in charge, his side managed a 3-3 draw against Manchester United at Old Trafford.
United are never happier than at home, and with Roy Keane back from suspension to sort out any slip-ups, few expected a troubled Chelsea side under new management to do more than turn up, lose and head back home. Instead, they're returning with a point. They've always had the talent, quite a contact here from Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank giving them the lead, but rarely the resolve. And when a trio of United jabs left them adrift at 3-1, a thrashing looked imminent. And perhaps it might have come, but for a severe case of butterfingers afflicting United goalkeeper Raymond van der Houw. The header went straight at him, but still dribbled through. By contrast, Chelsea guarded their defences rather more carefully. Graham Lasso here intercepting Cole's net-bound effort. And a few moments later, he scampered past Beckham to cross for the equaliser. Torrey Andre Flo, the scorer.
Arsenal could have moved to within a point of Manchester United with a win at Portman Road this afternoon, but Ipswich scored through Marcus Stewart and the Gunners had to wait until the 84th minute for Dennis Bergkamp's equaliser to salvage a point. Paolo Di Canio, Joe Cole and Frank Lampard gave West Ham their first win of the season at Coventry. Bradford went down to a strike from Southampton's Hassan Kouchil. Ian Hart put Leeds ahead, but Kincladze levelled for Derby. England strikers Kevin Phillips and Michael Owen were both on target as Sunderland got a point at Anfield. Aston Villa led through Julian Joachim until the last-minute goal by Osland Alpe handed Middlesbrough a draw. Graham Stewart got Charlton's winner at Newcastle United. Leicester can go to the top of the Premiership tomorrow if they beat Everton, and Charlton move up to 5th. In Scotland, the leaders still haven't dropped a point. Stilian Petrov's header providing Celtic's latest victory. Hibs drew 1-1 at Dunfermline. Rangers beat Motherwell 1-0, and Aberdeen won 5-3 in a thriller at Dundee United. When we come back, 11 years ago, the people of the Czech capital, Prague, took to the streets to demand access to what they saw as the benefits of capitalism. Now the World Bank and the IMF are in town, and in their wake are the protesters who say capitalism must go.
The definitive account of Diana from her closest advisor for 8 years, Patrick Jeffson. Shadows of a Princess, this weekend only in the Sunday Times.
We're now directly above the center of the ancient city, which dates back originally to 43 AD. In its heyday, several million people lived and worked in this bustling metropolis. Now, if we look over to our right, we can still see the imposing dome of St. Paul's Cathedral. And in the distance, we can just make out Harrow on the Hill, still inhabited in parts.
When this happens, you'll want to know why. Discovery Channel.
You care. We care. I care. Black & Lazars, the experienced pair in eye care.
Welcome back. So capitalism's major players have gathered to meet in the Czech capital Prague, but as the representatives of the IMF and the World Bank arrive, they bring in their wake the now familiar band of anti-capitalist protesters determined to turn their ideals into direct action. As our diplomatic correspondent Lindsay Hilsum reports, it's a confusing spectacle for many Czechs who fought for the freedom to embrace the market. And it also raises the question, what does this bizarre coalition of international demonstrators actually want?
A lone call to protest. 11 years ago, Czechs overthrew communism from the streets. But those who demonstrated then are somewhat baffled by the activists arriving in Prague this weekend, targeting globalization and the very capitalist system the Czechs struggled for.
To the IMF and the World Bank, get off your lazy, fat bureaucratic arses and use Prague.
Street theatre against the money men, watched by tourists, and Jan Hus, a 15th century rebel against the Catholic Church, an early form of globalization. We found one group of protesters building a globe to roll symbolically through the streets. They're not so much the dispossessed as the discontented.
There's a good percentage of people here who are not asking for a more ethical capitalist system, but are actually looking to find a way of living beyond the system of capitalism, which is basically money, which is basically a system of concentrating wealth into the hands of the few.
The money and the sort of things that the states are going for, and the paving everything and then building strip malls and putting all the money into blah 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 is all coming out of somebody else's pocket, and is all coming out of sort of it's big. that's all I can say, really.
Young Czechs have a different vision. In the communist era, this was a weapons factory. Now, I discovered, it's the heart of capitalist entrepreneurship. I came to find the young man they call the Bill Gates of the Czech Republic. 4 years ago, Ivo Lukačovič started Seznam, the first Czech internet search engine. At 26, he employs 30 young people.
I have spent 15 years in the communism regime. My father was in a prison because he was against the communism, so my father spent 2 years in prison. I wish all these protesters to spend 15 years in communism. They will maybe understand that right now there's no better system than the capitalism. Yeah.
Today, in the castle high above Prague, the Czech president's been bringing the two sides together. Maybe he's one of the few people who can. He came to power from the streets as leader of the Velvet Revolution. He was fighting for democracy, but he found it inevitably brought with it capitalism and globalization.
Jsme odsouzeni žít všichni na této planetě.
We're all condemned to live together on this planet. There's nowhere else to emigrate to. So we have to talk to each other to find the best and fairest way to live together.
But some here have their doubts. This locomotive factory used to employ 30,000 people. After privatization, 9/10 of the workers lost their jobs. Men like Ladislav Binko, who took part in the Velvet Revolution, but feels globalization hasn't helped the Czech Republic.
We expected to join the world's great producers, but at the moment globalization has only meant one thing to me. Instead of bramborák and houska with butter, I eat sandwiches from McDonald's and drink Coca-Cola, which I've never liked.
Prague has become a symbol of global culture, the unfettered demands of tourism, the ugly intrusion of Americana into its historic centre. This week, the security men guarding the World Bank president are extra vigilant, but he says he'll listen to his critics.
For me, it's important that they be here, and also that they give some focus to this issue of globalization. But I think you have to say that the demonstrators, if they demonstrate peacefully, and if they're ready to discuss it, are really a constructive, not a negative force, even if they don't like me.
This afternoon, a handful of international anarchists went looking for trouble. They found it at the station where they laid into a couple of skinheads. No one was badly injured. Debate about globalization involves non-governmental organizations rather than anarchists, skinheads and communists, but all made their point mainly peacefully today. The saints in Wenceslas Square have seen it all before. Lindsay Hilsum, Channel 4 News, Prague.
Well, now, Wayman Bennett's one of the protesters on his way to Prague, and he's here now. Wayman, why are you going?
I'm going because at the moment we think that global capitalism is going around the world, causing the death of 19,000 children. And at the end of the day, the people that benefit from this are a tiny minority. 4 people own as much as the whole world's wealth. Bill Gates is amongst them. But these multi-billionaires don't care anything about us, really, and it's about time we stood up for the world's poor.
And there are political parties that are expressly set up to do that, so why bother going to Prague?
We think that if you look at a political party like the Labour Party, it seems to have been bought off by many of these global companies. They're enwrapped with the fact of these people's wealth, and they're not doing anything to challenge them.
But the problem is, and we saw this in Seattle, and I saw it myself in London, is that what you end up with is a load of disparate groups. You're worried about, as you say, as you see it, the 19,000 people dying as a result of capitalism, wherever that figure comes from. But there will be people there from all over the place with totally disparate ideas. There's no cohesion to this. It's just the discontented.
Firstly, the 19,000 comes from the World Bank in terms of their own figures about children that die as a consequence of many of the policies, the structural adjustment program. Secondly, actually, we do know what we're against. We're against the poverty that exists across the world. We're against the privatisation that's taken place, which is only benefiting those people at the top. Today.
Right. Now, what about those people, and they were in Seattle, they were in London, there are all these events, who basically just want to have a pop with the police. That's what they're there for, and start a fight.
I actually think that if you look at both Seattle, if you look at Washington, if you look at Millau, if you look at all those demonstrations, what you see is that people turn out to peacefully demonstrate, actually to have their democratic rights. And actually the police and the various forces that are there supposedly to defend democracy actually turn against them and make a decision to treat them in a different way. I mean, if you compare the way that most demonstrators are treated...
Are you justifying the violence?
No, I'm saying this. I'm saying that if you look at the oil protest this week and the treatment of the people who used our direct action against, which did bring the country to a standstill, which shows that it works. At some point, people have to listen to you. What you see is actually the police were polite and said we had to give these people the right to demonstrate.
Okay.
We're just asking for those same kind of rights.
Wayman Bennett, thanks very much indeed. Which brings us to the weather. Most of Britain will have a dry night. However, thicker cloud will bring some showery outbreaks of rain across Ireland and into western parts of England and Wales overnight. Central and eastern Britain will start fine and dry, but the cloud and showery rain in the west will spread east. After a dull start, western parts will brighten up again, and the outlook, showers in central and eastern parts will die out, but more rain will move in to the southwest. And our main headline tonight, Tony Blair has now arrived in Brighton for the Labour Party conference, but a poll carried out by NOP for this programme shows the Labour Party has fallen 8 points behind the Conservative Party. That's the Tories' largest lead since 1992. That's it. We're back tomorrow at 7:30. Until then, that's Channel 4 News and Sport. Have a very good evening.
Jeff, we just don't need you.
What do you want me to do? I'd like to take him back to my house to see his grandmother.
He was